Hello and welcome back to another Modelled Right video for informal letter question for IELTS General Writing. Let's begin by taking a look at the question I'll be writing for. Here's our question statement. Write a letter to your friend about a book that you have read recently. Include the following in your letter. Describe the book. Say why you want him/her to read it. You can choose whether it's him or her. Tell him or her how to get the book. Okay, seems quite straightforward to me. Pretty nice question, quite open, talking about a book. So I can probably think of quite a few ideas for this pretty quickly. Let's highlight some of the key language. So your friend, so I've highlighted who, which tells me the tone. So this is going to be an informal letter. And pretty simple, this question. Just talking about a book I've read recently. It doesn't specifically say in the question statement whether I'm recommending, whether I'm complaining, whether I'm explaining. But if we move into the bullet points, I get a bit more detail. So first one, describe the book. Again, pretty open bullet point, so I can just talk about the story, what it looks like, anything else I can think of. Now it says, say why you want them to read it. So the second bullet point really gives me the purpose of the letter. It's actually a recommendation. So it doesn't tell me in the question statement, but in the bullet point it does. Say why you want them to read it. And the third bullet point, tell him or her how to get the book. So explain for that last one how they can get hold of it. Okay, here is my plan. So the question is to the left, plan to the right. And as we've said, it's informal, explaining a bit, also recommending, kind of a mix really. Mostly recommending, I'd say, with some explanation because I'm going to explain what the book is as well. Okay, so bullet point 1, describe the book. P1, travel tips for Southeast Asia and key information. I just came up with that in my plan. I just thought it's something that I'll write about. And bullet point 2, say why you want them to read it. P2, upcoming holiday. So I'm using note language here. I know what that means. It's not my upcoming holiday. What I know is the person I'm writing to is having a holiday in Southeast Asia. So that's why I'm recommending it. And also I'll talk about examples of great tips. What I'll probably do is say that I used it on my holiday and say, oh, it told me about this and it was a really good recommendation. So that's what I'll say. Upcoming holiday for the person I'm writing to, and I used it and it gave me some great tips. And lastly, how to get the book. And maybe not such a deep bullet point like describing the book, there's loads to write about how to get it. I'll just simply offer that they can use my copy, or also say you can get it online or down at a local bookstore, and maybe just give a bit of detail about that depending on time and overall word count. If it looks like I've written, 200 words and I'm only a couple of sentences into P3, I'll end a little bit quicker. But if I need extra writing, I can go into more detail for P3. However, I doubt that's the case because bullet point 1 and 2, I can kind of talk a lot about. I think P3 might be a little bit shorter. Okay, so that's a run through of the question, run through of my quick plan in note form. As always, notice no long sentences. The plan really wants to be written within 1 minute of receiving the question. So let's get going. As we have already identified, this letter is to be used with an informal tone. So I'm just going to start off my salutation with a simple, hello there, Simon, let's say. Now again, you'll often be given the salutation within your IELTS writing, but it's good to see me do this anyway. Okay, so let's move on to our introductory section. Often you can either do this with 1 or 2 sentences. I sometimes mix it up. For this, I think I'm just going to go with 2. And my first sentence will introduce tone, which in a way I already do in my salutation. But I'm going to introduce tone with my first sentence. In the second sentence, I'll introduce the purpose and topic of the letter. So, hello there, Simon. I hope you and your family are doing really well. Friendly, pretty relaxed, personal. That's a great way to open up an informal letter. Okay, so I've set the tone. I've signalled to the examiner this is an informal letter. And now I want to introduce the purpose. I hope you and your family are doing really well. I'm writing to let you know about a book I bet you're going to love. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this sentence here. I'm writing to let you know about, whatever it may be, in this example, a book I bet you're going to love. I think you're going to love. I believe you're going to love. So different levels of formality there. And I decided, whilst writing, I was going to go very informal. I bet you're going to love. I think you are going to love is semi-formal. I believe you will love. That's more formal. But I'm being super informal. Just kind of thinking whoever this Simon person is must be a good friend of mine. And that's fine because it's an informal letter. I'm writing to let you know about a book I bet you're going to love. Okay, introductory section done. Let's move on to BP bullet point 1. So bullet point 1 is describe the book. Again, yeah, really open bullet point, this one. I could make up loads of stuff about this book that I'm thinking of. I could bang on about it, talk about it, write about it for ages. Let's take a look at my plan. Travel tips for Southeast Asia and key information about the book. So just quickly skip ahead to BP2, which is say why you want him to read it. So what I don't want to do is talk about that in BP or paragraph 1. So don't talk about why you want them to read it. In this bullet point, in this paragraph, only talk about what the book is. So just there, an example of not mixing between BPs, between your bullet points. Okay, so describe the book. I'm just going to say recently I went to Southeast Asia, which introduces the topic. You might well remember that I spent some time traveling in East Asia. Wow. Apologies whilst I write and talk. Travelling in Southeast Asia. I could full stop there in Southeast Asia. But I'm actually going to just add a little M-hyphen and just add an extra clause at the end. What an amazing place. Showing off to the examiner quite early on. I'm flaunting my fluency. I do like that expression, flaunting your fluency. What an amazing place. Again, the hyphen, just really useful for adding on small clauses at the end of sentences. Try it if you like. Okay, you might well remember that I spent some time travelling in Southeast Asia. What an amazing place. So this opens up the topic I'm then going to say about the book. Let's say before my trip, I saw a travel companion guide. Terrible spelling. Companion guide in a local bookstore. I decided to buy it for my trip, and it was the best decision I ever made. Let's just go back. Maybe I'm overusing exclamation marks. I don't want too many exclamation marks. Balance is always key. Let's read back from here. Before my trip, I saw a travel companion guide in a local bookstore. I decided to buy it for my trip, and it was the best decision I ever made. So I've introduced the idea of a travel companion guide, and I said it was a really good decision. Maybe I can talk a bit more about the book, possibly say who wrote it, or talk about its length, or kind of what it's like inside. What I'm going to do is here, I'll just say it's written by a famous travel blogger, say a travel blogger, and there's lots of beautiful photos inside. And that will probably just about do me for my first bullet, paragraph 1, but let's just see about the length. The book was written by a famous travel writer. I'm not going to go with blogger. The book was written by a famous travel writer, and there are hundreds of beautiful photos and useful illustrations inside. Let's reread, as we should always do. The book was written by a famous travel writer, and there are hundreds of beautiful photos and useful illustrations inside. I'm just going to add a bit more detail here with some brackets, just to give a bit more key information. In my plan, I wrote key information. So what kind of illustrations? Just really short, useful, such as city maps and tourist areas. I don't want to say city maps and tourist maps. That's too much of the same thing. And I'll finish there. So let's just read that back again. The book was written by a famous travel writer, and there are hundreds of beautiful photos and useful illustrations inside. I did full stop. Useful illustrations inside, such as city maps and tourist areas. Okay, so first paragraph is all about describing the book, and I think I've done that in quite good detail. So let's move on to paragraph 2. Let's take a look at BP2. Say why you want him to read it. And my plan P2, upcoming holiday and examples of great tips. So what I'm going to say is here that Simon, I know in this imaginary situation that Simon is actually going to Southeast Asia too. Therefore, I recommend the book. And I'm also going to give just maybe one example of how the book helped me. And therefore, Simon should definitely give it a go. So let's just say that Simon, we remember or we know that Simon's also going to the same region soon. If I'm not mistaken, you'd also planned to go to the same countries in the next few months, next few weeks, next few months, whichever, it doesn't really matter. I'm just being a little bit creative here. If I'm not mistaken, you'd also plan to go to the same countries in the next few months. It's your first time there, right? Okay. We have a rhetorical, not hypothetical, a rhetorical question here. I'm not really expecting it to be answered, or at least answered straight away. Within the letter, but you can sometimes use them in your informal letters. Of course, Simon might respond to the letter, but really this is an example of a rhetorical question. So I'm speaking directly to him in the letter. It's your first time, right? And just a nice structure to use within your letters, sometimes if appropriate. It's your first time there, right? And kind of the reason I'm saying it's your first time is then I can say, well, you should get this book. It's a really useful companion. So it kind of helps me, shows off some new structures to the examiner, but also helps me say, I recommend this book. So let's just read back. If I'm not mistaken, you'd also plan to go to the same countries in the next few months. It's your first time there, right? I would highly recommend getting this travel book, as it was a real lifesaver for me. Okay, let's just change that. I would highly recommend getting this travel book as it was a real lifesaver for me. It's a bit of an idiomatic expression. It didn't actually save my life. I didn't use it to block an incoming missile or whatever it may be. I didn't use it to fight off some pirates. It wasn't actually a lifesaver, but it was very useful. So just to show that you can use idiomatic expressions within informal letters if appropriate and accurate. I would highly recommend getting this travel book as it was a real lifesaver for me. So I now want to give some examples of great tips. And these kinds of things within travel guides, I can really choose any of them. It could be about, say, hotel recommendations, restaurant recommendations, whatever it may be. I can just add that as an example just to show in my letter, to Simon that he should also use it. It was a real lifesaver for me. I'm going to go with, let's say, hotels, and we'll go with anywhere really. We can even make up a city if we want. Let's just go with Bangkok off the top of my head. I was really struggling for decent and well-priced hotels in the city centre of Bangkok. However, the book recommended I stay in a completely different area, a bit off the beaten track. Okay, let's just read that back. It's a reasonably long section we've written without rereading. I was really struggling for decent and well-priced hotels in the city centre of Bangkok. However, the book recommended I stay in a completely different area, a bit off the beaten track. Beaten track, again, a bit of an idiomatic expression, colloquial language there, basically meaning less popular areas. Because of this, I experienced a real local and rich, let me think about this, because I just want to say now that what the book recommended I stay off the beaten track, therefore I had an amazing time. Because of this, I experienced a real rich, a very culturally rich time whilst on my stay. I'm just going to leave it there because I am beginning to write a little bit longer paragraphs here, and I don't want to be really writing 250 words or more. Ideally, I'm looking for between maybe 180 to 230 words, something like that. Of course, all within that sort of 20-minute timeline. Let's just quickly reread and we'll move on to paragraph 3. And I think we'll go from here. I was really struggling for decent and well-priced hotels in the city centre of Bangkok. However, the book recommended I stay in a completely different area, a bit off the beaten track. Because of this, I experienced a very culturally rich and exciting time whilst on my stay. Just an example of editing there. I think that's a better structure to use. A very culturally rich and exciting time whilst on my stay. Okay, just quickly go back to the bullet point and the plan for P2 and just make sure we're on track. Bullet point, say why you want him to read it. Yeah, okay. P2, upcoming holiday examples of tips. Yeah, okay. So first time there, recommend the book. It was a lifesaver for me. How was it a lifesaver? Give an example which maybe persuade Simon to get the book. Okay, so let's move on to our final and probably pretty short paragraph, as I know that I'm hitting the word count now, but I need to cover it in full. So BP3 is tell him/her how to get the book. And my plan, you can borrow it from me, or you could get it on the Amazon or just bookstore. And I could maybe add a little bit of detail there. So, you know what, I'll just begin with the Amazon store. If you're looking to get the book, I think Amazon has a 20% sale on right now. You could get it in a couple of days. Also, I'm more than happy to lend you my copy of the book. What can we add here? Is there anything else I can add? I could add a brackets and say I'm not going to be using it. I'm not going to be using it anyway. You know what? I will add that. I've already got some brackets, but I just like adding that. It's a little bit of humour, almost joking. Like, it's not like I'm going there soon. I've already been. So you know what? I will leave that in. I generally say don't use one structure like brackets or hyphens or these kinds of things too often, but you know what? It fits really well. Let's read this back and just think about, is it enough for my final paragraph? If you're looking to get the book, I think Amazon had a 20%, I think Amazon has a 20% sale on right now. A little bit of an edit on tense. And I just made that up, of course. I don't even know what this book is. The book's not real. You could get it in a couple of days. Just adding a bit more information. How, from the bullet point, how to get the book. Also, I'm more than happy to lend you my copy. And I'm just going to take that out just to avoid repetition of the book. Too much repetition there. Also, I'm more than happy to lend you my copy. Lend, to give, lend, to borrow. Very informal and colloquial, but it's an informal letter, and I think that is fine in terms of tone, and a bit of a jokey, positive end within brackets. So, I'm happy with that. All the best. And see you soon, David. David, spell that correctly. All the best and see you soon. That's a really nice send-off. I often just end with all the best or see you soon, but why not mix them together? And that brings us to really the end of this letter, informal letter of a book recommendation. I think it's a very strong example of a letter that really focuses well on the bullet points and uses a range of language. It's maybe a little bit too long, possibly, but I think as it's written within the time frame. But of course, now we've finished it, there's time for a quick read through. Hello there, Simon. I hope you and your family are doing really well. I'm writing to let you know about a book I bet you're going to love. You might well remember that I spent some time travelling in Southeast Asia. What an amazing place. Before my trip, I saw a travel companion guide in a local bookstore. I decided to buy it for my trip, and it was the best decision I ever made. The book was written by a famous travel writer. I've already used travel a little bit, so I'm going to take that out. Just a famous writer's fine. By a famous writer. And there are hundreds of beautiful photos and useful illustrations inside, such as city maps and tourist areas. If I'm not mistaken, you'd also plan to go to the same countries in the next few months. It's your first time there, right? I would highly recommend getting this travel book, as it was a real lifesaver for me. Is there any repetition here? I would highly recommend getting it. No, that's okay. Oh, here we go. As it was a real lifesaver for me. I was really struggling. So it's just a little bit of, not complete repetition, but a bit too much for me. I was struggling for decent and well-priced hotels in the city centre of Bangkok. However, the book recommended I stay in a completely different area, a bit off the beaten track. Because of this, I experienced a very culturally rich and exciting time whilst on my stay. If you're looking to get the book, I think Amazon has a 20% sale on now. Just take some, it's often shorter's better. You could get it in a couple of days. Also, I'm more than happy to lend you my copy. I'm not going to be using it anyway. All the best and see you soon, David. So there we go, an example of a very strong task 1 informal letter. There's quite a range of language used and structures, and as always, I recommend you read this through many times. You could read this, you could rewatch this lesson many times, but also I would just recommend reading this through every day 2 or 3 times, and that will help you digest and internalize some of the language that I've used also.